So as my panel gets set up, everybody, my name is Lisa Peyton. I work at Intel. I call myself an immersive media strategist. I'm extremely happy to be here, and I thank you all for coming and joining me today. I've got three really exciting panelists that are going to talk about empathy, empowerment, and embodiment in VR. And if you've been spending any time at the sessions today, you might think VR is dead, and that it's all about AR. But I do think that there are some extremely interesting applications for true immersive. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And I'm going to let the ladies introduce themselves and tell you what they're up to. And then I'm going to jump right into questions. If you're here, so you are interested in this, and I would love to know if you have burning questions. I would love to hear those up front and make this more interactive instead of being spoken at for another 40 minutes. And I, of course, have some questions if none of you are ready to jump in as soon as they're done talking. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my panel. Donna, why don't we start with you? Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting us. And I hope you can hear me. There we go. I am Donna Davis. I am a professor at the University of Oregon and director of the Strategic Communication Master's Program. My research area is in virtual worlds, and I've been working for the last 10 years with avatars, and in the last 3 years working with people with disabilities in the virtual world to study what embodiment and community in a virtual space means to the human experience.
Hello, I'm Jerri Lynn Hogg, and I'm a media psychologist. And I look at how technology and media influences the way we connect, form relationships, make meaning of our lives. I'm the director of the media psychology program at Fielding Graduate University, where we have master's and PhD students studying media psychology. And we really look at media psychology and social change. And then finally, I'm a past president for the American Psychological Association for Media Psychology and Technology. And there, my presidential initiative was to use media and technology for good.
That's great. Hi, everyone. I think mine is on too. My name is Robinne. I'm a product architect with over 10 years of experience building digital products across mobile, web, and games, and most recently, virtual reality and augmented reality. I am also executive chair of the Television Academy for the Interactive Group, which defines excellence in the interactive realm of broadcast and television and digital content. So always working with a lot of great people such as yourselves on new projects and ideas and ways of bringing content. I'm based in Los Angeles, but I'm also based in Johannesburg, South Africa, where I have an office where we do a lot of grassroots projects and content around VR, AR, and also STEAM workshops that incorporate teaching kids how to program in Unity and other different types of programs like Viewphoria and Aurasma, HP Reveal, et cetera. And excited to be here and be on this panel.
Great, thank you so much. And I'll just say Dr. Pamela Rutledge unfortunately had a family emergency and wasn't able to join, and she's extremely sorry that she couldn't make it today and sends her regrets. But hopefully you'll get a chance to connect with her at a later date. She's a very interesting speaker as well. So to that end, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and, as promised, any burning questions right out of the gate. Let's get going. Let's get cracking, talking about some of this stuff. I know someone, you were asking, do you have a question back here? Yeah.
Thanks. So, as I've witnessed today, like, most people are talking about AR instead of VR. So you guys, like, I'm a believer in VR. I believe that fundamentally, like, in the future, people will enjoy the VR experiences much more than AR, because AR is kind of like, to me, it's like a mixture of things that, don't have depth, like, as much as VR. So, what do you think? Like, what's the best practice for VR, do you think, like, in given like 5 years or so?
Great, quite love it. VR. Go ahead, Donna.
Yeah, we knew you were going to.
I'm very hopeful about the future of VR and cautiously optimistic, I would say. I think that VR has a ways to go in developing the technology that's more accessible financially, physically. It needs to have more content provided. But I think that especially as I work with people with disabilities, and I look at people who often live in isolation, whether that's due to a physical circumstance, a geographic circumstance, social isolation, there's a lot of reasons that people are alone. As a matter of fact, I just read an article a couple weeks ago that said loneliness is the new tobacco. I know they said it was sitting not long ago. Now it's loneliness, especially in an aging population. And I think virtual reality, especially in a space of virtual worlds, which is where I work, it provides an opportunity to connect people in really powerful ways. And I think that as we start thinking about embodiment and what that means to us, as we have a body in this space, and we're able to engage with others regardless of their ability, their location, and as more work goes online, what an extraordinary way to work when you can feel that you are in that space, embodied, and sharing content and experience in a virtual world. The work I do is inspired by a woman who's now 91 with Parkinson's disease, who could log in, put on a ball gown. Her son, who lived on the other side of the country, would log in, put on a tux, and take his mother ballroom dancing.
That's so sweet.
You can't do that in AR, right? So I think it's that very personal, experiential, social experience that happens in VR that is going to make it continue to grow and be more important.
Yeah, and all of that, I think we all know that intuitively, the power that it has to transform our experiences with one another. But at the end of the day, the hardware is still the biggest barrier for most people. Like, imagine if all of us right now could experience VR like that, whatever simulated environment or scenario without putting on a headset, we'd all be hooked. We wouldn't even be here. We would be either out in the park or at home, immersed in our own worlds without a headset. So there's still kind of these economic challenges and economic behaviors where, you know, people have to go and buy another headset or another piece of equipment and put it on, and then there's the price point, and then in certain countries, you know, this seems like as much as a new car. But that said, we've seen how fast technology has been able to kind of have us get over that. Like, for an example, the dishwasher. It took 80 years for the dishwasher to become kind of a household staple. Whereas mobile technology, or the consumer internet, a better example, has only taken 10 years for all of us to adopt it as a way of life. So we're definitely seeing the paradigm shift of the way that we adopt new technology be highly accelerated. But it still has those challenges, I think, to get over. And that's the big question mark.
So I'm going to disagree just a little bit, and I really believe that we are going to move to a place where we're no longer talking about, are we in real life, are we in virtual, are we in some version in between, and that we will be creating environments. And it'll be those environments that we need. So in some cases, we will need to be deeper into the environment and be in a virtual world, the VR experience, as we call it today. And other times, we just need a simple overlay of information. So I do believe that we're going to get to a space, and that's probably what we're hearing right now when we're hearing VR is dead and it's all AR now. I think it's, while we're trying to struggle with these different situations, and it's really driven more by getting the technology where we need it to be, and so we need to separate it out right now to make meaning for us, but we'll get to a point, well, much to your point, that we won't need the technology as heavy duty wearing it, and you know, having it be such a big interface with us, and that we'll be able to slide back and forth between the different needs of the environment that we're desiring.
And I think just naturally being here in California, just even on this part of the United States, we're always thinking about VR as a consumer experience or some experience as an individual, not thinking of it, and not obviously this panel, but I think most people always think about, oh, in games and roller coasters, and I can do that on my phone, but there's such bigger implications of it as the work that you're doing, and in science and medicine and military and you know, automotive. There's so much more. So I think when we think about the death of VR, it almost has to be compartmentalized, like it may die as a consumer form of entertainment, depending on what else comes about, depending on how AR evolves, how mobile continues to kind of be king or queen. But in other sectors, it may thrive more than anything we've ever seen. So I think it's also important to remain cognizant of where it will fit in the future of our lives.
And that technology is shifting all the time. Some people would say radio is dead, and yet there's more radio content available today than ever in the history of humankind. Some people say the news is dead. People are consuming more news than they've ever consumed. So it's going to be a constantly evolving experience as the technology changes and more uses are I mean, we create, Microsoft developed the very first desk camera where you could, they put the cameras on everybody's desk so they could actually talk to each other on a camera. And the employees hated it. They'd hide, they'd cover it up, they'd put it away. It was a miserable failure. And how many years later did they buy Skype? So it's, what is the technology? How is it adopted? How is it introduced? And to what effect? And sometimes we miss the mark, but it loops back around and comes back to life in a different form over time.
And are we ready for it?
Right.
We just have to be to that stage where we're
Right.
ready for it.
Yeah.
So let's, question. Love it. Go ahead. Yeah, spit it out.
So I would agree with you. I think we tend at this conference to get a little fixated on the device type, and people want to distill it down into categorization. It really doesn't matter, because what we're building is immersive technologies. And whether they're an MR or XR or AR, it really, the alphabet soup won't matter in a few years because it'll all blur. Here's my question, is the first E in your title. And with the internet, one of the things we've seen is the anonymity, and sometimes not being anonymous, has encouraged really, really bad behavior. It's emboldened people to be racist, to mistreat others. It hasn't increased empathy, it's actually decreased empathy and compassion. And I would believe, my theory would be that a more immersive environment would actually exacerbate that problem, not alleviate it. But I'm interested in your opinion.
I disagree that empathy has decreased, but I think we need to be aware of. I don't know where the. That doesn't mean that we don't also have other issues out there. So think about some incredible VR experiences, such as the Cloud over Cedra. That's the film that was put out by the VR experience, really, that was put out by the United Nations, where they followed around a 12-year-old girl that was at a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan. And I have a dissertation student, well, actually she's a graduate now, that did her study on that. And it was a highly emotional situation. And we do know that there are a lot of virtual reality experiences that help people create empathy. So I think we have to look at it a little bit more by case basis. And I would venture to say it's not the tool that's causing it. It must be something in our culture. And let's look at the cultural issues that are going on that makes us feel that we need to lash out like that.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, don't you think it's kind of almost the same as television? Like television, some TV watchers use it to consume information and to be more educated and enlightened and learn about the world. Other people turn it on to check out and just, watch the worst type of TV that there is and become maybe even worse people because they become less active, they get fed bad information, Would you say that maybe VR is no different, that people can make that choice on the spectrum?
Well, I think when we're talking about empathy, I would later on get into other experiences in VR that maybe we need to be concerned about, but which are also some of the positive benefits as well. Yeah. But I think this is more culturally driven. And this is just the tool that's facilitating it right now.
And empathy is a trait. I mean, there's a lot of controversy over that very word as to, can you actually teach empathy, or are you born with it? And I could watch the commercial that IKEA put out about the lamp where it ends up out in the garbage, and I cried. So some people are just that way. And yet there are others who will use that anonymity and the platform to wreak havoc. And there's a lot of research coming out right now that's talking about as much social content is now available and people are able to log in a social platform. The statistics are showing there's a higher level of depression and loneliness, that the more connected we are, the more disconnected we are. So we have to really, I think the E that's not up on this board is ethics. And we have to be thinking about what are the implications of these technologies as people begin to adopt them, and to what effect over time, and how are we thinking about that in ways that I work with a marginalized community that this is, I often say it's like Oz, you open the door, and they have an ability to do things that the physical world is simply not allowing for them anymore. So that's the miracle in it. And sometimes anonymity is even the miracle for them. I work with a 30-year-old man with cerebral palsy who is in a wheelchair, and his voice is very disabled as well. And he says that we talked to the folks at Lynn Lab and High Fidelity about designing the technology for people like him. And Philip Rosedale looked at him and said, "Why do you need voice?" And he said, hey, his caregiver had to translate for him because he said, "When I speak in the virtual world, people think I'm retarded." And that was his word. I hate the word. But they think I'm retarded. The reality is he's brilliant, he's witty, he's charming, he's a wonderful human being, but his mouth doesn't work right. So for him, the anonymity, people treat him as a normal human for the first time in his life. They don't look at him as the man with cerebral palsy in a wheelchair. They interact with him as a really extraordinary, witty human being that he is, because he types with his nose on the phone that's mounted to the front of his wheelchair. So for him, text is really important. And for him, the veil of anonymity opens doors in really positive and powerful ways.
Question, yeah. I'll take this one. Hi.
You're next.
You know, I agree that it's not the technology that's creating the emotion. It allows much freer expression of it, simply. But I think the three E's here, empathy, empowerment, and embodiment, are all things that are created through parenting. And I want to know how VR is being used to improve parenting.
Wahaha.
Yeah.
I went into the PhD program I did to study family media literacy because so many kids are being raised in front of a screen without parental advice or contact at all. I think there are some extraordinary opportunities to teach parenting through VR. It's like the little eggs that were the babies that...
Tamagotchi.
Thank you, that were such a fad a few years back. And it's like, oh, I can't let it die. It's how do you teach things like parenting or sharing a house and sharing household chores and all of those things? There's wonderful role play opportunity in VR for parents. But people aren't doing that yet. I keep waiting.
Yeah. Well, I'm on a study right now with a group in Ireland, and in Ireland for some time now, they've been using small dolls to teach peace and inclusion. And now they want to take it all the way down to toddlers and see whether that might make a difference, which is a little bit more challenging when before they had television shows, et cetera. And so they've brought me in to sort of talk about how can we make this a powerful situation and also include the 2-year-olds and also worry about screen time and those types of things. But in the meantime, they're using the dolls and teaching the parents. And we've come up with some interactive situations there, but I hadn't thought about VR.
Yeah.
What a great suggestion.
You know, if I had to guess, I would say that the parent who today is giving their phone and their tablet to their kid to keep them quiet and keep them occupied, that behavior is probably not going to change with VR. If they're still a parent 20 years from now, I think VR will just become another screen where they're like, here, be quiet, go into the K-hole of VR and leave me alone. I don't think it's going to transform, and this is just my personal opinion, nothing backed by research, but I just feel, parents use technology either in good or bad ways as a way to distract their kids and keep them quiet or education. I don't know if VR is the solution for changing those behaviors in parents. Okay.
No, because I wouldn't recommend, I want to be clear here, I wouldn't recommend a small child in a VR situation. No. We're talking about the parenting, right? Okay.
My master's was in family, youth, and community science. And if in Second Life, you can actually buy a HUD that will make your avatar pregnant. You go through the entire cycle. You can choose what kind of birth you have. And I was following people that were going through that experience to try to understand it. And honest to goodness, I have total confidence the woman that I was following had postpartum depression when it was done. I would love for doctors to study that, to see if that's really, the chemical effect on us was the same as though she had actually had a child. So it can be that kind of powerful an experience that's why I just think it'd be a really wonderful parent education tool.
Great, we've got another question over here.
Hi, my name's Carrie Shaw, and my company is called Embodied Labs, and we create embodied journeys for caregivers to go through journeys of our elders so that they can better understand how to give care. And so one of the things that we run into a lot is trying to figure out how to define and dissect empathy to be something that we can quantify and tie back into a return on investment, whether that's monetary or defined by data. So I was wondering if you all could talk about how you in your research have maybe redefined empathy in other terms, and then found ways to study that using assessment to define the return on investment.
Well, I think first of all, a lot of times we're looking at what type of emotional reaction. For many of the reasons that you brought up, it's very difficult to measure empathy. And is it a trait, or is it something that you can learn, a skill that you can learn? So I would say we looking at it from what type of emotional impact, what type of sense do they have when they're in that situation, and when does it start to slide off where they're not thinking about the fact that they're in a virtual reality experience.
I've had a hard time figuring out how to actually measure and quantify empathy. It's like resilience. It's another one of those things. Some people are born with resilience, and others, it's not typically something that can be taught. But we can expose people to experiences that can make them more compassionate, or help them understand, walk in that other person's shoes. I think that it's going to take way more than a 5-minute experiment to really get people to change attitudes and behaviors. I think it has to be a longitudinal process where they really can experience it over time before they'll really before you can start to move that needle.
So what are you trying to do? You're just trying to be able to show that your business model is working, is that right? Because then maybe you might be able to look at how the caregiver feels about themselves. That's if I'm understanding you correctly.
Well, so when we got started, we didn't really think about empathy as something we were doing, but it came up a lot in talking with the people using the experiences and training. So we've kind of dissected it and said we're looking at behavior change. So how do care practices change over time, confidence and job satisfaction, and I've sort of, since starting this company almost 2 years ago, I've learned to not like empathy, because empathy is a nice to have, and it's really hard to talk about it in terms of something that we take seriously and need to have. So it feels weird to say that I almost dislike empathy, but we mostly want to learn more about it to be able to define it and say why it's important as a practical solution.
Well, I would look at measures of well-being. Having personal experience with family members and caretakers and the family members, I realize what an incredible toll it takes on them. And I would look at measures for well-being as opposed to empathy. There's a whole variety. I can talk to you in more detail afterwards if you'd like.
And let's just this is, I think, one place where there is a little bit of more of a concrete ROI would be the third E, embodiment, where the actual physicality, your brain changes. And maybe you guys can talk to us. There's research now coming out proving things, with phantom limb syndrome and these just amazing work. And there's hard concrete evidence there. So maybe talk to us about that.
Well, I believe that's where that fourth E comes in. We have to be really careful about the situation, and the best way we can do that is continue to research what's going on. Because we do know that people, when they're in that in a powerful VR situation, have experiences as if they really are there. And we need to be careful if we put them in sort of that scary movie type of situation And it's one thing to look at something 2D on the screen, to go to a movie, have a bucket of popcorn. It's another one for Freddie to sort of jump out behind me. And are we creating post-traumatic distress disorder by doing something like that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right here.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up. I'm a 360 filmmaker, and I love the medium. I love VR, but I'm also very passionate about mental health and very concerned about. Actually, I saw a piece that was meant to create empathy through taking you through the traumas of someone who's been discriminated against, but it was very, very traumatic. It wasn't just a little traumatic. It was basically you were losing your mind, like the way that they were losing their mind, and then in real life that person died. It was very, very intense. And it was interesting because they were trying to create empathy for people that are different than you, but I came out feeling kind of traumatized. And they hadn't expected that to happen. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a very particular question. I just would love to hear more about your work in regards to trying to protect the mental health of people who are experiencing VR experiences, and just any work you've done to try to share your point of view on that.
Well, we are still a little bit in the wild, wild west when it comes to VR. I'm on the IEEE standard policy for augmented and virtual reality, so there's groups like that are exploring this and trying to come up with standards and policies. I would recommend those over regulation at this point, but I do think that we as an industry need to be able to continue to research, find out what types of impact it has, and then be able to caution folks or make people aware of what kinds of impact. If it can have that kind of powerful impact in a negative way, think about all the positive things it can do as well. So, for example, this is augmented reality, but HIT Labs for years has had the spider going up your arm, and that idea of exposure therapy. We have work that is out of Skip Rizzo and out of his group that have used virtual reality experiences to help with soldiers that are returning and help with the PTSD there. So there's a lot of powerful items that are positive as well. We just need to be able to be aware of that and then start to set some guidelines for the industry.
Yeah, I think that especially as it relates to younger audiences, even at the high school age, it really is important to kind of make that a priority, because, when I was doing some work in South Africa last year, we were invited by the Mandela family to put on a workshop for kids, but not young kids. They were juniors and seniors in high school. And, that we were doing some coding and robotics, and one day we had an introduction to virtual reality. And some of these girls were 16, 17, and 18 years old. But because it was in a township in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, where there's not a lot of diagnosis of perhaps being on the spectrum of autism, there were some girls who went into the headset and had total breakdowns. They just got freaked out. And the other girls were fine. This wasn't like a lot of lasers. It wasn't something that a lay person would think there may be issue with it. It was a very kind of calm and serene environment, but it still set off these triggers. And it's something to be very mindful of. I think that in an ideal world, we will focus on almost a rating system where people are, people in the medical field are really dedicating time to diagnosing. This may affect people who are on the spectrum of autism. This may impact these type of groups with these types of potential disorders, no matter where they sit. Because without that, unfortunately, you have to go through it in the other way, which is freaking a kid out, getting traumatized, because there is no warning. And so yes, I know exactly that is a challenge, and now we deal with it differently. Now when we go in, we have to have like a little bit more of an extensive description for parents to read through and kids to read through about what to expect. And whether or not they're diagnosed, we're hoping that it will maybe prevent some kids who will not be comfortable in that to avoid the VR experience.
I'll add to that that I have, because we're working with people from all types of disability, whether it's, we have people with PTSD, we have somebody with epilepsy, we have an agoraphobe, we have quite a few that have PTSD, and it's not from battle, it's oftentimes from abuse. And so there are, and every spectrum you can imagine. So there are physical and invisible, visible and invisible disabilities. And one of the things, we're doing this as an anthropological study over time. I work with Tom Belstorff from UC Irvine. He and I are partners on this project. And he is a cultural anthropologist. I come from the media side. But what we've learned over time also is that they've taught us about those triggers. So we had people with PTSD who said, that flashing, we have 2 sims, and we've allowed people to build their experience of ability or disability, to tell their story of what it means to have a virtual body in a virtual place. And the woman with who's our agoraphobe built a safe skybox that was her safe zone. So that if she ever feels like she's if she's dealing with a trigger, she'll teleport straight to the safe zone. And it's a quiet, peaceful, meditative space where nobody will find her, nobody will bother her, there is no sound, there's no stimulus. We also discovered we needed to keep a separate space for experiences that had flashing lights or were really big. Simple things like that you're only gonna find if you observe over time, and you put these people together and you can understand what those triggers might be. Another one built a different skybox that you can blow up. So she can go up there and blow things up just to vent and get it out of her system.
Yeah.
So there's some really interesting ways to create experiences based on the needs of the people in your community, and understanding what the potentials are as you go into building and designing, I think is the other really important piece that I'm trying to scream from the rooftops right now as we think about inclusive design. We have to think about universal design and inclusion, that when we think about inclusion isn't just about race and gender, but it's about ability and disability.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we have time for just a few more questions.
Hi, yeah, I had a question continuing to think about empathy. So I can see the pro-social aspects. I've heard of VR experiences where people become more sensitive to the environment, maybe use less paper or protect the corals and so on. But on the other hand, we hear that when people are in other gaming environments, let's say first-person shooter games, that it's not having an impact because it's a game. So how can some VR experiences have an impact and then others not? If they have pro-social, can't they also have negative impacts? How does that work?
There's a lot of research out about gaming in general. There's not a lot of research out about first-person shooter in VR. And I think you've uncovered something that is concerning to many people, given the recent events that have happened in schools. I have to say, a listserv that I'm on with the American Psychological Association, we're actually talking, it's a very heated discussion about that and what additional research needs to be done there. Yeah. So I think we don't know yet, unless somebody else knows something. But
that's my understanding too. I think, obviously this isn't a conference about parenting, but whether it's VR or something else down the line in the future, it's going to be a problem if it enables and empowers people to work out their violent tendencies as practice for the real world. And so it's kind of hard to, point the finger at VR or even gaming, because if it's not one of those two, it's going to be something else. So it's almost as if you're trying to, stop a flood with the cotton ball, it's going to come out somewhere else and be a big problem until we really get to the root of the issue. Again, not going into a parenting conference or a conversation, but it's hard. It's a big challenge. And you're right, there's not enough research and there's definitely not a solution.
I think we have one more. Final question.
Yeah.
Two more?
Yeah. This is a little...
sorry, I promise this one should be winning.
It's just a,
There'll be
it's just a,
fisticuffs.
well, I know, really.
Is it a
Hot
virtual
topic.
experience or not?
Hot topic. Just wondering if you have done any research about empathy versus compassion in virtual reality, and what the outcomes or the differences have been there.
Short answer, no. I've not compared those two.
And I think compassion is definitely one of those things, and of course, she's the psychologist that could probably answer that way better. But compassion is one of those things that I think would be easier to measure than empathy. But it's a short term, right? You have compassion in the moment. But I worked on a 360 video journalism project trying to educate people about clear cutting and what the impact that has on rivers and our drinking water. And rather than studying empathy, what we wanted to study was changing behavior as a result. Could they understand what was going on? It wasn't going to make them more empathetic toward a forest, but it might make them feel more compelled to donate to the organization that was trying to get something done. So we were really looking at measuring engagement rather than empathy, the other E word.
Yeah, I would say engagement is what we've been looking at.
Yeah, same here. I've been working on a project that's very similar called In Your Shoes, and it takes two people from two sides of a very volatile, contentious issue like gun control, since we were talking about that, and kind of puts the two in the room, not only in VR for the audience, but also in virtual reality for the two individuals in the series. And the goal is for people to be engaged around a conversation, because they're topics that are hard to have, and we know we're not going to change minds in a VR session or 10 VR sessions, but it's all about facilitating a compassionate conversation about ways to kind of find some form of healing around these issues that have torn our country apart in the last 5-10 years.
Last question, promised to you.
Thank you. Hi. Is this working? Yeah. I just wanted to know if where funding comes from for some of the research that you're doing, and where you find production partners to work with.
Great question.
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
My funding is through the National Science Foundation. And I work in a school of journalism and communication. So production partners for us, we're building, creating courses and teaching these skills to the students that are coming out of our program. So we're able to use it as both a research and teaching opportunity. And we're looking now at other foundations outside of NSF to look at more long-term. We're working through the Department of Cultural Anthropology and Technology, two different divisions of the NSF supported our work.
I'm seeking funding, and I'd welcome it from you. Thank you very much. We have had small grants come, for example, the one that I was talking about that happens in Ireland, and so we're doing a cross-country collaboration. We've also had some small things from the American Psychological Association and groups like that. But oftentimes what we're looking at is being able to do some research with different people that are out there creating, and help them understand what they've created and its behavioral impact, as well as be able to do some research ourselves.
And I've recently been told by a few people now, so I'm curious if this is actually going to be something that will sustain, but both French and Canadian governments, both of their leaders have committed to putting funds aside for this type of work and research in VR and AR, massive $1 million funds. So I've known now 5 people who have recruited teams in those countries in order to fund their projects. So I don't know, it might be a little insider tip. I don't know how long the window is closing on that, but it seems to be a veritable opportunity for people looking for funds.
I would also add that I think a lot of foundations are now looking for interdisciplinary research that include both the academic side and the production side. So a lot of times, Kent Bai, the Voices of VR, is from Portland, and I went to a meetup where he said, academics will be irrelevant in VR. So how do we stay relevant? And because our process is so much slower than industry is moving. So how do we partner with industry to find ways to bring the thought process from academia to the production side of industry to really create impact.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, panel. Thank you. Thank you for the great questions. It's been a pleasure to be here. We would love to extend this conversation into happy hour. We're all on Twitter. Please reach out. It was great. Thanks.